Chapter 6. Murphy leaned on the side of the turbo cruiser, surveying the burned-out buildings around him. A little over a decade ago, old Detroit had still been a vibrant area. Poor, but teeming with families and old-timers who had lived there for generations. Above him, the moon peeked in and out of dark, threatening clouds. He glanced at the lone operating burger stand on the block. Lois, her helmet off, was paying for a couple of coffees with a credit card. Murphy eased his revolver out of his holster and practiced doing quick-draw tricks. Lewis walked over with the coffee, and Murphy executed a double twirl, gunslinger style, slipping the revolver back into its holster. Lewis smiled, handing him the coffee. "Pretty fancy moves, Murphy." Murphy grinned sheepishly. "My kid watches this cop show, TJ Laser. This laser guy does that every time he takes a bad guy out." "And you didn't want to disappoint your kid, huh?" "Role models can be very important to a young boy." Lewis sipped her coffee, smirking. "Uh-huh." Murphy shrugged. "Okay, so I get a kick out of it too." Lewis eyed her new partner. "Married man, huh?" "Yeah." "Happily?" Murphy thought a moment. "Yeah, I suppose." "You suppose?" "Well, I am happy. Lucky too. I mean, I have a family to come home to at the end of the day, right? A little antidote for the insanity. But sometimes you just get so tired." "Physically or mentally?" Murphy sipped the coffee. "I wake up tired, Lewis. I've been a cop all my life. I came into the job wanting to save the world." "Make the streets safe for the good folk." Lewis nodded. "Something like that. But you know, the longer you're at this, the more it grinds you down. You find yourself treading water, hoping to get through each day in one piece, hoping you won't have to drill anyone." "I know," Lewis said. "I do know. Imagine what it's like being single. I come home every day to a cat." "You like cats?" "I hate cats." Murphy chuckled. "Masochism 24 hours a day, huh?" Lewis drained her cup. "I figure I'm on a roll." "I wanted a dog once. My wife didn't go for the idea. My son didn't go for the idea. Nobody wanted to walk him. He wound up getting fish." "Fish are nice," Lewis pointed out. "Ever try to teach a fish how to be loyal?" "They must be a bitch to paper train too." Lewis smiled. Murphy grinned back. Lewis had a nice smile. A sudden thought occurred to Murphy. "Hey, I'll be right back. I've got to call my wife." "I don't think so," Lewis replied, turning her head towards the car's dash. A beep tone shrieked. The dash lit up. Lewis stuck her head in the open driver's window. Information began appearing on the grid. The grid map lit up, tracking a moving blue dot. The comlink line began yammering. "All units in the vicinity, 211 in progress. Grid plate 107, subsector 16. White panel van heading north." Murphy made a move to get past Lewis and into the driver's seat. "That's us, partner." Lewis smiled and slid behind the wheel. "Well, get in, partner, or else I'll take off without you." Muttering under his breath, Murphy ran around the fired-up turbo cruiser and jumped in the passenger's side as Lewis stood on the gas. The car fishtailed away from the burger stand, leaving a plume of dust and grit behind it. Murphy leaned forward towards the comlink. "Central, Unit 154 responding." He stared at the pulsing blue dot zigzagging across the grid of the sector shown on the dash. The voice of the comlink dispatcher was calm and efficient. "We copy 154. Suspects are armed and considered extremely dangerous. Use of high explosives in connection with the robbery of..." Murphy's mind wandered. It suddenly occurred to him that he should have called Jan hours ago. He didn't exactly know why that occurred to him. Mentally shrugging, he returned his attention to the blathering radio. Blocks ahead of the turbo cruiser, a battered white van, crowded with men, weapons, and charred sacks of money, roared down the back streets of old Detroit. Inside the van, Clarence Boddicker was worried. Lines were etched in his high forehead. He glanced at the feral little man driving the van, a weasel of a human named Emil. He sighed. Emil would never be more than a sub-human. He glanced at his associates huddled in the van. Idiots all. How did he, a man of such savvy, such intelligence, hook up with such an enclave of lowlifes? This was the price one had to pay to be a master thief. Leon, a tall, shambling man, sat with his knees tucked up under his chin. Joe, a tough young black with an attitude problem, glared at his feet. Chan, a Hong Kong-born patsy whose face looked like a computer course in nervous twitching, tried not to show his fear. Barrel-chested Bobby and clean-cut Dougie glanced at each other nervously. The smell of burnt paper filled Clarence's nostrils. Anger welled within him as Emil silently guided the van down side street after side street. Finally, Clarence snapped. He turned to Bobby. "You burnt the fucking money!" Bobby, whose IQ approximated his belt size, was not cowed. "I had to blow the door," he shrugged. "What do you want?" Clarence, realizing rational give and take was impossible, glared out the front windshield. "It's as good as marked now, you asshole! It's worthless! Worthless!" He allowed the final S sound of his sentence to slither through the air, as deadly as an adder. To punctuate the thought, he reached down to the floor and grasped a handful of burnt bills. He tossed them into Bobby's face. Bobby shrugged a second time. "Hey, some days you eat the bear, and some days the bear eats you." Clarence didn't have time for anger. Emil was quivering behind the wheel. "Clarence! We got a cop on our tail!" Clarence glanced out the side mirror. Indeed, there was a turbo cruiser speeding after the van, closing fast. "This is not one of my better days," he muttered. He didn't mind killing when it was pre-planned. Spontaneous slaughter, however, could really be a drag. A real drain of energy that could be used for other, more lucrative endeavors. "Stand on it, Emil," he sighed. Behind the van, Lewis floored the gas pedal. The turbo cruiser sliced through the darkness. Clouds obscured the moon. "Hit it," Murphy commanded. Lewis punched a button, and immediately the ghetto landscape was illuminated by the pulsing strobes of the cruiser. The silence of the night was shattered by its screaming siren. Murphy faced the comlink. Central, we are in pursuit of possible 211 suspects. Request backup. Fat chance, Lewis muttered. In the careening van, Clarence popped one stick of chewing gum after another into his mouth. He chewed furiously. "This is getting bothersome," he whispered. Behind him, his gang members sat nervously. Not a backbone in the bunch, Clarence thought. Emil's teeth were chattering. "This crate ain't gonna outrun twin turbines," he pointed out. Clarence sighed. Obviously, in Emil's neighborhood, first cousins were encouraged to marry. "Well," Clarence advised, "slow it down then." Emil gaped at his leader. "What are you, crazy?" Clarence flashed a crocodile smile at the little man. "Emil, please, shut the fuck up and do as I say. Bobby, get the door." The van began to slow down. Murphy sat in the passenger seat of the turbo cruiser. The hairs on the back of his neck slowly began to quiver. This didn't smell right. He slid his revolver out of its holster. Lewis continued to stand on the gas. "Slow it down a little," Murphy said. "Why? We're gaining on them," Lewis answered. Murphy shot her a look. Lewis reacted as if she'd been slapped in the face. In the back of the van, the gang members cradled their shotguns. It looked as if they'd get a couple of more blue caps tonight. They pointed their guns in the direction of the back door. Bobby sat nearest the door, poised to kick it open with one movement of his dinosaur-sized feet. Clarence took a deep breath. 4, 3, 2, 1. "Now!" he screamed. "Shoot to kill!" Bobby kicked the doors open. The men in the van raised their shotguns and fired en masse. Smoke filled the back of the truck as a maelstrom of hot lead exited the speeding vehicle. Clarence blinked into the smoke. He didn't hear the tinkle of a shattered windshield. He didn't hear the squealing of tires. He didn't sense the presence of mangled flesh. Gradually, the smoke evaporated. Clarence and his men gazed out the back of the van. There wasn't a police car to be seen. There was nothing but street. Lots and lots of empty street. Leon, not amused, turned to Emil. "I thought you said there was a cop back there." "He's there, man! I saw him!" Before Clarence could get a word in, the turbo cruiser appeared, leaping off the sidewalk on the left side of the street and zipping past the open back of the van. Behind the wheel, Lewis gritted her teeth as Murphy opened fire on the alabaster truck. Instinctively, Lewis ducked as 2 volleys of shotgun pellets singed in the air. She pulled the turbo cruiser away from the van. "Are you okay?" she yelled. "No problem," Murphy replied. "I think I got one of them." In the back of the van, Clarence's men were in a state of panic. Bobby clutched his bleeding leg. "Ah, shit! I'm hit, man! I'm hit!" Joe and Chan fired another round at the police car. The turbo cruiser disappeared again. "Man!" Joe muttered. "This is spooky shit!" Without warning, the turbo cruiser charged again, this time from the right side of the road. A volley of bullets slammed into the side of the van. Clarence's men hugged the cheap carpeting as the bullets thwacked harmlessly into the metal. "My leg!" Bobby cried. It's bleeding! Clarence sat, fuming. Shut up, Bobby! I've got to think. A bullet whizzed by the passenger mirror. Joe, not thinking, dove across Clarence and fired his shotgun out the window, nearly taking out Clarence's eardrum. Sit the fuck down, Joseph, Clarence said. Joe glared at Clarence, but did as he was told. Close the back door, Clarence ordered. Chan quickly slammed the doors. Emil continued to speed onward. A smile flashed across Clarence's face. Okay, I've got an idea. They've accelerated again, Murphy said, from his vantage point in the pursuing vehicle. They're scared, Lewis cackled. They're outclassed. She pressed her foot down on the accelerator, picking up speed. There was something about the setup Murphy didn't like. He silently reloaded, keeping one eye on the van. He was about to voice his doubts to Lewis when his fears became reality. The back of the van burst open, and the screaming form of one Bobby Martin, street punk, assassin, drug user, and rapist, was tossed out towards the street by his former accomplices. Shit! Lewis hissed, watching the burly body hurtle through space directly towards the speeding turbo cruiser. The body struck the windshield with a sickening thud, shattering the glass and causing both Murphy and Lewis to shield their faces with their hands. Blood and bits of semi-solid matter shot into the turbo cruiser as Bobby's body continued on its way up and over the cruiser's hood. Lewis glanced in the rearview mirror. The stocky thug's lifeless form spun wildly in the street behind them. The force of the impact, however, caused Lewis to momentarily lose control of the speeding cruiser. Hold on! She yelled, playing with both the gas and the brakes, trying desperately to avoid a total spin-out. The turbo cruiser slid towards the sidewalk. Murphy's eyes almost popped out of his skull. Before them was a row of a dozen parking meters. I hope these are the new plastic jobs, he muttered as the car ploughed onward. The turbo cruiser smashed head-on into the row of meters, nearly ripping them out of their concrete underpinnings. Miraculously, the impact didn't destroy the car's motor. Let's hear it for plastic, Lewis said. Murphy leaned into the comlink. Central, we are in pursuit of the suspect vehicle. Shots fired. Suspect has been injured. Request medevac. Code 3, 9th and Century. Priority request for backup. Repeat, Central, we are in pursuit. Dispatch didn't reply. Thanks a lot, Murphy added. Lewis eased the car to a stop. What happened to the van? She asked. Murphy studied the grid. The blue dot was speeding away from the scene, zigzagging down alleyways. These guys may have blown a heist, but they were pros when it came to intercity guerrilla warfare. Hit it, Murphy said. Lewis gunned the twin turbines, sending them screaming into the night. Murphy reached forward and killed the sirens and lights. He was tense now. Adrenaline was flowing. It was an Ahab great white whale situation. If these morons would sacrifice one of their own just to slow down one lousy patrol car, they were capable of anything. Murphy bent over the comlink. Central, we've got a heat track on the suspect vehicle. It's heading west on the Webster Street Bridge. Silence was the reply. Murphy was grinding his teeth now. Bad habit. Jan always nagged him about it. Said he'd cause sparks in bed one night and burn them all to Valhalla. Turn right on 19th, he whispered to Lewis. It's a shortcut. How do you know? I grew up around here. Down that block. Used to be a nice neighborhood. Lewis nodded, determined to catch the van, and executed a screaming right turn. Murphy looked up towards the sky. The clouds were clearing now. A baleful full moon shone down on the car. It made him feel uneasy. Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night, he began. Huh? Just a line I remembered from an old movie about the full moon. There's the van, Lewis whispered. Next to a sprawling, abandoned warehouse, the white van sat, doors open and empty, in the sickly blue light afforded by the heavens. Pull up slowly, Murphy advised. Lewis guided the turbo cruiser past the van. Nobody's home, she said. Over there, Murphy said. Lewis guided the patrol car to the side of the warehouse and killed the motor. Murphy punched their coordinates into the computerized map linked to Central. A view screen came to life. All units presently engaged. ETA 20 minutes. Murphy shrugged. There's never a cop around when you need one. Both the cops put their helmets on. No use taking chances. They activated the comlink radio in their suits and climbed out of the cruiser. Murphy pointed towards the front entrance of the warehouse. Lewis nodded and pointed her gun towards a stairway leading up to the second story. Murphy winked at her. His comlink squawked. Stay in touch, he said. Lewis nodded, popping gum under her helmet. Will do. Murphy disappeared in the front door, and Lewis gazed at the rickety metal stairs towering before her. She hoped they would hold. With the grace of a cat, she swung up onto the stairway and climbed. The interior of the warehouse was bathed in darkness. Murphy silently scanned the area. It smelled wonky to him, but hell, they were committed now. Cargo containers stretched before him, a man-made labyrinth. He darted down a row of boxes. He stopped suddenly. Voices. Male. A half dozen or so. Gripping his gun, he slowed his pace. He looked towards the ceiling. He hoped Lewis was all right. She was tough, but hell, when it came down to it, she was a woman. 120 pounds tops. No telling how big or how strong the gorillas hiding in this tomb were. He padded silently down the twisting, turning rows of boxes, listening for the voices. Murphy took a chance. Climbing up on a stack of crates, he scanned the floor some 10 feet below him. 4 stacks away, he saw a small red pinprick of light. Someone was smoking. Dumb move. Swiftly and quietly, he leaped from stack to stack until he stood poised above 2 men. They were smoking a joint. The weasel he recognized from the van. It was the driver. A tall, clean-cut guy was toking with him. Murphy made a move to leap down on them. He hesitated. Somehow, that just didn't seem the smart thing to do. He retreated along the tops of the crates, climbing down on the other side of the haphazardly constructed wall. High above him, on the second floor, Lewis crept along a wall. The heat up there was unbearable. She undid her helmet and snapped it on the side of her uniform, keeping the comlink on beneath her chin. She shook her hair loose. That was better. She glanced around her. She was surrounded by half-packed crates. Somewhere nearby, a door opened. Without thinking, she flattened herself against the wall. It was one of those nights she wished she had pursued a career in dental hygiene. She heard the sound of heavy breathing. Close. Very, very close. She hugged the wall. She heard a zipper creak down. She smelled urine. Someone was pissing just around the corner. Sweat rolled down her face as she watched the small river of piss run by her feet. Yeah, dental hygiene seemed like the perfect career right about now. Louis waited until the peeing had stopped. She watched a young black man walk towards an open freight elevator. Seeing an opportunity, she ran along a mountain of boxes and positioned herself on the far side of the elevator. The black man, a damp spot still on the crotch of his pants, walked forward towards the lift, fiddling with his zipper. Within an instant, Louis was upon him. She put a gun to his head. "Freeze," Louis ordered in a cool monotone. The man stopped at the door. His fly was still open. He glanced at the young female cop. This was embarrassing. "Okay, let's see those hands," Louis whispered. "Nice and easy." Joe used one free hand to jiggle his zipper in an exaggerated manner. "Sure, baby. Nice and easy. You mind if I zip this thing up?" "Go ahead." He waited until he was sure the cop's attention was focused on his crotch, before he slowly lifted a blackjack from his rear pocket with his free hand. Louis sighed and allowed Joe to fiddle with his fly. She didn't see the blackjack coming. Joe chuckled as the blunt instrument smashed into her face. Louis reeled, toppling towards the open elevator shaft. She clawed the air, trying to grab hold of something, anything solid. She felt the ground move from beneath her feet as she tumbled backward into the shaft. Her senses askew, she had the presence of mind to twist her body mid-air, aiming her feet at the ground far below. She hit and hit hard, sprawling into a puddle of dark, stagnant water and grease. She gasped for air. Pain sliced through her forehead. Her consciousness ebbed as a rat scurried by. Soon all was darkness. Joe stared down the shaft. Maybe if the cop wasn't too banged up, he'd have to get a little fun before he killed her. He smiled to himself, picked up his auto-load shotgun and headed for the stairway leading down to the first floor. Dougie and Emile continued to smoke their joint. Dougie enjoyed toking up, but Emile? He had problems, paranoia. He felt uneasy about everything when he was wrecked. He saw shadows, heard sounds, felt like people were watching him. Like now, for instance. He stared at the figure of a cop, pistol drawn, standing not 6 feet away from him. He glanced at the joint in his hand. This was some good stuff. He handed the joint back to Dougie. Dougie too seemed to be having the same hallucination. Then the hallucination spoke. "Hello, boys," Murphy said. Dougie made a move for his shotgun. He didn't get far. Murphy fired a single shot into his chest. Dougie dropped to the ground, writhing. Emile shook his head clear. Unless he was mistaken, hallucinations didn't fire sidearms. He glanced at his own autoload sitting next to a crate not 2 feet away. Murphy shrugged his shoulders. "Dead or alive, pal. Either way, You're coming with me." Emile allowed the gun to sit where it was. Murphy walked forward and kicked it away. Reaching behind his back with his free hand, he produced a pair of handcuffs. He tried to hide the fact that his hands were trembling. He didn't like having to fire a shot. He gave himself away on that move. He lowered his lips towards his comlink. "Louis, I got a situation here." "Hey lady, you copy me?" Emile's wide eyes were darting this way and that. Murphy effectively lowered his voice into a snarl. "Okay, tough guy, you know the routine. Hands on your head." Murphy made a move forward to cuff Emile. Something behind him made an all too familiar ka-chunk. He turned his helmeted head upward. Chan pointed an autoload directly at Murphy's forehead. The reed-thin form of Leon appeared from Murphy's right side. "Why don't you let us take it from here, Emile?" Leon trained his shotgun on Murphy's midsection. "How about dropping your gun, cop?" Murphy gritted his teeth as Leon placed the barrel of the shotgun against his neck. He slowly lowered his gun hand, letting the Matiba fall. Emile ran towards the cop. "Your ass is mine, pig!" The little man froze as a calm and soothing voice emerged from the shadows. "Not yet it isn't." Clarence Bodicker wiped a bead of perspiration off his elongated forehead and smiled. "Take his helmet off. I'd like to gaze upon our hero in the flesh." Emile ripped the helmet from Murphy's face. Murphy glared at Clarence. "Glad to see you," Clarence said sincerely. In the back of his mind, Murphy worried about Louis. He hoped she had gotten away. He hoped he had radioed for backup. He hoped... A gun barrel came smashing up into his chin. He tumbled back onto a wall of crates, dazed. "Party time." Clarence grinned. 30 feet away, at the bottom of the elevator shaft, Louis came to, hearing faint voices. She moved her body slowly, tiny shards of pain making themselves felt at each joint. Nothing broken. She slowly got to her feet. The floor level of the warehouse loomed 10 feet above her. "Shit," she hissed. A rat zipped by her feet. This definitely was not a place to linger. She made a running jump for the dangling, grease-encrusted cables. Slowly, she began to climb, her legs wrapped around the oozing metal rods. Her hands began to slip. Grease cascaded onto her knuckles. She found herself sliding back down onto the bottom of the shaft with a thud. She stared at her hands. They were bleeding and raw. "Goddamn!" she swore. She began to climb again. "Murphy," she whispered, "where are you when I need you?" Clarence's foot slammed into the side of Murphy's face, opening a large gash under his right eye. The gang leader circled the fallen policeman casually, his shotgun tipped casually over his shoulder. Every so often, he'd extend the toe of his shoe and prod it into a section of Murphy's prone body, like a butcher examining a piece of prime beef. "Are you a good cop?" Clarence bent over to gaze at the policeman's name tag. "Officer Murphy?" Murphy remained silent, staring at Clarence's twisted expression. "Sure," Clarence said. "You've got to be some kind of great cop to come in here all by yourself." Clarence smiled pleasantly. Before Murphy had time to react, he swung the autoload off his shoulder and sent the butt of the gun slamming into Murphy's midsection. Murphy doubled over. He fought to control the tears caused by the pain. If he was going to die, he wouldn't give these street scum the satisfaction of seeing him cringe. He blinked suddenly. He might die. He swallowed hard. The idea had always been an abstract before, something to consider in the future. Now the possibility hit him full force. He thought of Jan and Jimmy. He cursed himself for not calling home. Clarence bent over Murphy's face. "Where's your partner, Murphy?" "The other one was upstairs," said Joe, walking casually to the spot. "I took her out." Murphy made a move to sit up. Not the smartest thing to do. Clarence extended a foot and, placing it on Murphy's chest, pushed the cop back down. "I bet that really pisses you off," Clarence said. "You probably don't think I'm a very nice guy." "Actually," Murphy said, "I think you're slime." "Humor," Clarence said, laughing wildly. The gang members behind him giggled as well. "A touch of humor. How refreshing." He took his other foot and slammed it down on Murphy's right arm, extending the limb flat against the concrete floor. "I have this problem, Murphy. You don't like me. I didn't expect you to. You see, cops don't like me." He slowly placed the muzzle of his shotgun against Murphy's right wrist. "So, I don't like cops." Clarence flashed an easygoing smile as he squeezed the trigger. Murphy's senses reeled as a deep rush of pain cascaded up and down his right side. He turned in time to see his right hand blown clean off his arm. Throwing off Clarence's foot, he grabbed the stump of his right arm and clutched it. Blood was spurting from his wrist in steady pulsations. He tried to speak. He couldn't. His vocal cords seemed fused together. The pain from his arm was throwing him into shock. He slowly got to his feet. He stared at Clarence, blinking his eyes wildly. These were the cop killers. The jackals. Clarence turned his back on the staggering cop and, swinging his shotgun back over his shoulder, walked away whistling. He paused and turned to his gang members. "Now he's all yours." Murphy stood, tottering, before the others. Emile, the ferret-faced punk, picked up his shotgun and fired. The concussion of the blast tossed Murphy 5 feet into the air. Sailing through space, Murphy stared down and witnessed his chest burst forth out of his protective armor suit. He found himself in a sitting position some 10 feet away from the gang members. He saw his legs twitch. He felt like a marionette whose strings were slowly being severed. He was losing his sight. The room was tilting this way and that. He noticed Chan and Joe pick up their shotguns. They squeezed the triggers. The air seemed to explode around him. The side of his armor suit shattered and then simply flew away into the night. Murphy struggled to maintain his perspective. This all seemed like some drunken dream. Images were both slowing down and speeding up simultaneously. He almost laughed as the Asian walked right up to him, pointing the muzzle of his shotgun directly against Murphy's shoulder, and fired. Murphy's entire right arm went twirling away from his torso. Amazing, Murphy thought. He was beyond pain now. His severed arm was still spinning like one of those TV game show Wheel of Fortune arrows. Spin the bottle, lose the arm. One of the gang members placed Murphy's helmet back on his head. Another gang member shot it off, taking a chunk of Murphy's hairline away with it. 2 more blasts. Murphy watched his legs shatter. Murphy's body seemed possessed by a strange and wild rhythm, something totally new, something almost paranormal. He found himself trying to stand upright on his shattered limbs. He felt himself tip backward. A thunderclap smashed through his brain, the sound of his head smashing into the concrete floor. He stared straight ahead. The room wasn't there anymore, not in detail anyway. Rather, the essence of the room seemed to hover above him. A dash of purple, a dash of cold steel blue, a crate or two, represented by a splotch of brown. Then there were the faces. High-foreheaded Clarence, a business-minded harlequin. Feral Emile, his deep-set eyes blinking wildly. Lanky Leon, a hayseed with a killer's instinct. Cool and impassive Joe, globs of Murphy's blood dripping off his black cheekbones. Chan, yellow and impassive, laughing silently. Murphy turned his head slightly on its side. He saw the men hover before him. Joe lowered his shotgun and shrugged. "I'm out of ammo." Clarence stepped forward and, pulling a Desert Eagle 44 out of his belt, nonchalantly aimed the pistol at Murphy's head and squeezed off an easy round. Murphy felt the bullet burrow into his left temple. He felt part of his head dribble off in back. The air seemed cold above him now. Clarence slid the gun back into his belt. He didn't twirl it, TJ Laser style. Murphy would have smiled if he had control of his muscles. The gang leader definitely lacked class. Clarence motioned to his associates. "Okay, fun's over. Let's split." The figures of the men melted away into the darkness. Suddenly, Murphy remembered the expression on his father's face years ago, when the older man lay dying in his own living room. Murphy understood the humour now. He appreciated the ironic sting of the term, an act of random violence. Random for the perpetrators, maybe, but certainly not for the victim. He felt his body twitching in long, bone-splintering convulsions. What a stupid way to die. Laughable, really. The ground beneath him seemed to rumble. Footsteps. He blinked his eyes, trying desperately to focus his vision. He watched Lewis skid to a halt some 5 feet away from his shattered form. Murphy sighed. The cavalry had arrived at last. "Oh, Murphy," Lewis said softly. Outside the warehouse, a van roared to life, screaming away into the night. Lewis knelt beside Murphy. She made a move to cradle his head in her arms. His skull was so badly shattered that she wasn't sure what to grab. She leaned forward into her comlink mic. "Officer down!" she blurted. "Repeat, officer down! Central, I need a medivac unit right now! My partner's been shot!" Murphy smiled from within. He was wrong about Lewis. She was strong, a survivor. So what if she was a woman? Most men would be puking their guts out right about now, and there she was, taking charge. He wanted to hug her, but he only had one arm. He vaguely heard the dispatcher's voice. "Calm down, patrolman. Help is on the way." Lewis didn't appreciate the dispatcher's dispassion. You calm down, you asshole! Get a medivac here now, or you're going to need one. Copy? Copy. Lewis sat down, Indian style, next to Murphy's twitching form. She smiled at him. A single tear rolled down her eye. Murphy gazed at her. Her features were alternately hazy and sharp. For a few seconds, she was every woman he had ever cared about. A chuckle rumbled deep within his chest. It emerged from his throat as a slow, hissing sound. He gazed into Lewis's eyes and twisted what was left of his lips into a smile. He forced his vocal cords to respond. He wanted to tell Lewis exactly what was going on. He wanted to explain to her exactly what it felt like to have the life blasted out of you, to lose touch with your body, to watch the world fade into a series of abstract shapes and forms. He looked at her meaningfully. "Some bitch," was all he said.